So you can define and design the best week in the world, but it's going to mean nothing if you can't defend it. So what we're going to talk about here are boundaries, setting boundaries, specifically how we're going to be able to say no to low value requests without damaging the relationships which matter to us. And also how to protect the calendar that you've just built from everyone else's sense of urgency. So before we get into how it is that we're going to be saying no, it really helps to know where these requests are actually coming from and if you can map them against your middle business model canvas. Because most calendar erosion really traces back to two of the segments that we have inside the business model canvas. One is customer relationships, and the other one is channels. Now, customers who want more of your time than the relationship really strictly requires, and requests arriving through whichever channel is easiest for someone else, rather than the channel that's actually appropriate for the size of that particular task. Now, naming this helps because it really turns everyone wants a piece of me into something a lot more specific and manageable. Now, saying no is really about audacity. It's about boldness. Now, we're not being arrogant over here. And we need to understand how to do it in a way which is daily and about not making it sound like big, bold moves. It's just small daily courage to decline something really that would otherwise eat into our very protected time. Now, a lot of founders, what I found is that they overinvest in softening their no's so much that they actually end up sounding like a maybe or even apologetic. And then the request comes back around a week later anyway. So the goal isn't really to be blunt or unkind, right? It's really to be clear enough that the request doesn't really quietly resurface. So there's a few practical ways in which we can decline those things which which are critical for us to protect. Now, there's something called the redirect. So that is pointing the person to whoever's actually best placed to help them, which is often not you anyway. There's also the delay. So let's be honest that now isn't the right time, but naming a specific point where you will revisit it, which is far more respectful than saying a vague, okay, maybe let's look at it later on. And then there is the clean decline. So this is simply being very direct, and it's not something that you can take on right now. And you don't have to over-explain or over-apologize. It's because over-explaining really often invites negotiation. Just pick whichever of these three fits the relationship and the size of the ask. Now, it is worth being blunt about the cost of skipping this skill. Because every time you say yes to something which is low value, you are, whether you're saying it out loud or not, actually saying no to something else. Right? Usually, one of the outcomes you set for the week back in a previous module. Now, the founders who struggle most with time aren't usually bad at planning. What they're bad at is at declining. And the plan really quietly starts to slip away. It starts getting eaten away, one polite yes at a time. So, a few practical habits that really protect the calendar on a day-to-day basis. So, default new meetings really to a shorter length than what's requested. Most things that need an hour could actually be done in 20 or 25 minutes if there's a clear agenda. So let's set ourselves a standing rule that for whatever automatically gets a slot and what doesn't. For example, anything under a certain value, or let's say an urgency waits for the weekly planning block rather than getting an instant yes in it. And let's resist the pull to respond to every request the moment it lands. The same day reply doesn't necessarily have to mean an instant decision. Now, something worth caveating is that not every boundary should be applied with equal rigidity. Okay, not everything is created equal. There are relationships and moments, a genuine critical client issue or key partner or a real emergency, where bending the rule is actually the right call. Now, skill isn't never bending. It's just knowing the difference between a genuine exception and the slow, steady erosion that happens when every request becomes an exception. Right. Let's summarize. Most calendar erosions are really going to be able to be traced back to customer relationships in the channels. And you've got 3 ways to decline that really don't damage the relationships. And there are very few practical habits as well that are going to protect your week that you've designed. And let's remember that saying no protects the time that you already have. But there's also another lever that we've mentioned a few times now without going too deep into it, and that is delegation. That's exactly what we're going to be covering next.